This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter and much more dangerous. Because what's happening right now is not loud enough to feel like a crisis. It's procedural. It's bureaucratic. It's wrapped in memos and subpoenas and phrases that sound legal enough to ignore. But this is how systems fail. Not all at once. Not in flames. They fail when the rules meant to protect independence are turned into tools of pressure. You are watching an institution that was designed to resist politics being tested for obedience. Not publicly, not honestly, but indirectly through threat. And if you're thinking this feels familiar, that's because it should. This isn't new. It's just closer now. Stay with me. Because once this line is crossed, it doesn't uncross itself. And what comes next doesn't announce itself either. Here's the mistake most people make. They assume power still lives where it used to. In elections, in speeches, in personalities, but the system doesn't move because of who's loud. It moves because of who can apply pressure without leaving fingerprints. Right now, control doesn't come from passing laws. It comes from deciding who gets investigated, who gets delayed, who gets dragged into process, because process is power. An institution can survive disagreement. It cannot function under permanent threat. And that's the shift you're watching. The system is no longer being asked to comply. It's being taught what happens if it doesn't. This isn't about loyalty. It's about anticipation, about officials learning quietly what resistance costs before they ever resist. That's how independence collapses. Not when it's abolished, when it becomes expensive. And the most dangerous part, almost no one needs to give the order out loud. Which brings us to how this became normal. There was a time when this would have stopped everything. A time when the mere suggestion that law enforcement might be used to pressure an independent institution would have triggered alarms, hearings, resignations, markets reacting before politicians did. But that was before. Now, the shift happens quietly, incrementally, one probe at a time. Before, independence meant insulation. Now, it means exposure. Before, public servants assumed that doing their jobs even unpopularly carried protection. Now, they calculate risk first, and that calculation is the change. Because nothing formally broke, no statute was repealed, no rule was crossed in bold red ink. Instead, the environment changed. The cost of disagreement rose, the cost of silence fell. That's how slow change becomes lethal. It trains people to adapt without realizing what they're adapting to. And once adaptation sets in, the system doesn't need to be captured. It starts pre-complying, which is why the next moment matters more than it looks like it should. This is the moment where it stops being abstract. Because the shock isn't dramatic misconduct, it's something much thinner than that. A criminal probe, triggered by testimony about a renovation. Not corruption, not self-dealing, not personal enrichment. A disagreement over numbers. Numbers discussed in public, numbers debated in the open, numbers corrected in real time. That's the pretext. An independent official does what the job requires, testifies, pushes back, corrects the record. And suddenly, the act of explaining becomes suspicious. This is not accountability. This is deterrence. And the reaction tells you everything. The denial from the top, the distance, the sudden insistence that no one knows anything about a probe so serious it's already underway. That denial isn't confidence, it's recognition, because everyone involved understands how this looks, how thin it is, how exposed the motive feels. If this works even a little, it won't stop here. Watch closely, because what happens next determines whether this was a warning shot or a test run. Here's what actually makes this work. Not the investigation itself, but the asymmetry. One side absorbs risk instantly. Legal bills, time, reputation, distraction. The other side absorbs almost nothing because the goal isn't conviction, it's friction. Every hour spent responding is an hour not spent governing independently. Every headline introduces doubt. Every subpoena rewrites incentives. And notice who benefits. Not the public, not the economy, not even the justice system. The beneficiary is leverage, a system where independent actors are forced to ask a new question before doing their jobs. Not, is this right? But is this worth it? That's the mechanism. You don't need to control the decision. You just need to control the consequences of making it. And once that lesson is learned, it spreads quietly, institution to institution, which is why the next escalation doesn't need to be bigger. It just needs to be faster. And it is now the pace changes because repetition removes shock. Another probe, another target, another denial, different background, different party, same result. People notice the pattern, but they stop reacting to it. That's the danger. The cases don't need to succeed. They just need to exist long enough to do their work. Delay, distraction, delegitimization. Markets don't like uncertainty. Institutions don't either. And suddenly the question isn't whether the system is being abused. It's whether resisting is still rational. That's escalation. Not louder, not Messier. Just closer together. Each move arrives before the last one resolves. No closure, no accountability, just accumulation. And when pressure accumulates faster than consequences, behavior changes. That's where we are now. Because once even insiders start calculating how much independence they can afford, the system has already moved. The only thing left to see is who feels it first. This is where it reaches you, because you don't work at the Justice Department. You don't set interest rates. You don't testify before Congress, but you live inside the outcomes. When independence erodes, it doesn't announce itself in policy papers. It shows up as volatility, as hesitation, as decisions made later than they should have been, or sooner than they should have been, for the wrong reasons. You feel it when prices don't behave the way explanations say they should. When confidence thins, when stability starts to feel conditional, and you're asked quietly to accept that this is normal, that this is just how things are now. That's the trade being offered. Less independence in exchange for less noise. Less resistance in exchange for fewer headlines. And it only works if people stop paying attention. So stay here. Share this. Hold on to the threat. Because what's happening next doesn't affect them. It rewrites the environment you make decisions in every day. And now it's no longer contained. This is where the borders stop mattering. Because the Federal Reserve isn't just a domestic institution, it's a signal. Other countries don't just watch what it decides. They watch whether it can decide. When independence weakens here, it doesn't stay local. Currencies adjust, capital hesitates, allies recalibrate risk quietly. Central banks are built on credibility, not force. And credibility is contagious in both directions. If political pressure becomes acceptable in one system, it becomes plausible in others. Not overnight, but just enough to justify imitation. That's how instability globalizes. What looked like an internal power struggle starts changing how the world prices trust, how it hedges against uncertainty, how it plans for shocks that haven't happened yet. And notice the timing. This isn't happening in a calm world. It's happening while systems are already strained, which means this pressure doesn't land on solid ground. It lands on cracks. And once cracks connect, no one controls where they spread, which brings us to what happens next. From here, there are only three paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Institutions bend without breaking. Language changes. Decisions become more cautious. Independence survives on paper, but it's quieter, more careful, less willing to provoke. The system keeps working, but with a new internal ceiling. The second path is erosion. Pressure continues. Probes normalize. Resistance thins. Each individual decision still looks defensible, but the aggregate effect is drift, not collapse. Hollowing. A system that still exists, but no longer anchors expectations the way it used to. And then there's rupture. That's when a line meant to be symbolic becomes operational. When a legal threat changes a macro decision, when markets sense it before officials admit it, when trust breaks faster than it can be explained away. None of these paths require intent to destroy the system. They only require indifference to what pressure does over time. Which one we're on isn't clear yet. That's the point. Because the most dangerous phase isn't after the outcome. It's before anyone agrees one is happening. Here's the part that doesn't resolve. Because systems like this don't end with a single decision. They end with a realization that arrives too late. No one wakes up one morning and announces that independence is gone. It just stops showing up where you expected it to. In explanations that feel thinner, in confidence that feels rehearsed, in stability that depends on silence. What you're watching now isn't chaos. It's conditioning. And conditioning works best when it feels technical, when it feels boring, when it feels like something only experts should worry about, but this is the layer everything else rests on. If this line holds, other lines matter. If it doesn't, none of them do for long. So don't look away because it seems abstract. Don't wait for a verdict that was never the goal. Follow the pressure. Watch where it's applied. Notice who starts adjusting before they're told to. Because the next video won't be about whether this happened. It will be about what finally moved when it did. And by then, attention will be the only leverage left.